So thank you for joining us for this Q&A, gardening Q&A. My name is Bailey Garrett-Brown. I'm the Adult Services Librarian for the Latah County Library District.
And I'm Rosemary Anderson, a circulation staff member also at the Latah County Library District.
And Linda, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Linda DeWitt. I actually completed the Master Gardener class last year and have kind of a special interest in seed saving. So I started helping manage the Palouse Exchange of Seed library in the Moscow branch, which has been great fun.
Awesome.
Let's see, Betta, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Betta Bunzel, and I've been in the Palouse area for 20 years now and gardening all of that time. We really love to grow food in small spaces and have participated in the co-ops offerings to the public and farmers market over all those years. So looking forward to a new season.
Be an interesting year.
Yeah.
And this is Ken, and yeah, I'm the other side of it. This is mostly Betta's garden. I work on the computer and do gardening, you know, as another side thing. So
We can afford to do the gardening because he sits at the computer a lot.
We always need one of those.
And Ken is very knowledgeable. He plays down his skills, but he's been gardening since he's a kid and he knows really an awful lot. So it's been a good inspiration to me.
Very cool. All right, and JC?
JC Jensen, I farm south of Moscow, halfway between Genesee and Moscow, 7 miles. And we have a native seed farm as well as a unconventional Palouse farm. We are no-till farmers. And we started doing Palouse prairie native seed, mostly Forbes seed or wildflower seed, about 14 years ago. And then we also do restoration on prairie. So that is our experience. It's gardening, but it's a little different, but there's still, we have about 100 acres in production for native seeds.
Wow, that's a lot. That's awesome.
JC?
Yeah.
Those flowers in front of the library are plantings from your farm, right?
They are.
Beautiful.
Some of them are.
Great, I know that. That's really cool.
Oh,
That was
cool.
from years ago. Yes.
Awesome. And then Jody, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Jody McCrory, and I own Swallowtail Flowers, which is a cut flower farm here in Moscow. The farm is just north of Moscow, about 5 miles. And this is my 7th year farming flowers, and I sell cut flowers at the farmers market, do some wholesale sales, and also do flowers for weddings and events.
Awesome. So great. I'm so excited to have you guys joining us today and answering some questions. So let's see. Rosemary, did you want to start off the questions?
Totally. And we just wanted to mention too that at the library, we're doing our curbside pickup for materials. So those items that you had on hold, you can come pick them up at the library. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we're offering a garden and a bag kit for free for those patrons who are coming to pick up their materials. And Linda and I have, well, mostly Linda has prepared the kits so we can hand them out to those who are looking to start their own garden. And Linda, I think we put beets, carrots, beans, peas, and lettuce, and those will be changing as the growing seasons change. But and we also hosted a seed swap a while ago, which went really well. So it's been cool to get more people into gardening, and I hope this will help too. So the first question we have from a patron is there any way to control or kill the weeds in my gravel driveway aside from using chemicals? So whoever wants to answer.
I'll start just because I'm going to give the master gardener answer, and then I'd like to know what really works. So I actually looked this up, and outside of chemicals, you know, the recommendations are, you know, if you can prevent and all that stuff, or use some biological means, which I laughed out loud because goats was suggested a couple of times, and I have goats that have no interest in what I want. Will go for anything that I've planted. So, but there was also a mention of boiling water. That might not have been the an extension publication, but solarization was an extension publication. So for people that have done this longer, do you have any real experience in something that has worked? Anybody else?
I was going to say I have a flame weeder. Not everybody in their home garden probably owns one, but it is useful on gravel if you get the seedlings.
Great idea.
Is that exactly what it sounds like?
Like a blowtorch, like a fire torch.
Yeah.
Good idea.
And Jody, that was mentioned. I forgot about that. That was mentioned also.
Yeah, I have a small propane tank that I use with it, so you don't have to haul around like the size of propane tank that fits on
Your grill.
It does work pretty well. And I was gonna say solarization with a plastic sheet, but it's really hard to keep a driveway clear. I have a friend who just pays a high school student to come pick them all out of her driveway.
Yes. Supporting the youth.
Especially right now, it's a good way to like make a little money without having to interact with anyone.
That's a good idea.
Any other thoughts on that? All right, so the next question we got from a patron is, my strawberries are a few years old. Each year, some of the plants put out a runner or two, but not all the plants. None of my runners have stuck. How can I encourage my strawberries to put out more runners, and how can I help them stick?
I guess we might be the most logical people to
Yeah, it's about looking at you guys.
We have plenty of runners on our strawberries, and they seem to stick pretty good. But I mean, I suppose you could, cut it off of the mother plant and plant it more in the ground.
Or leave the runner on, put a pot with some really good soil underneath the mother plant, and wait until in a couple of weeks it really does root down, and then you can cut the runners that way. But if you're taking really good care of the soil, they're going to find a way to get in there.
Yeah, especially if there's a lot of mulch on the ground. I think that makes the soil softer, so they can get roots in the ground.
Do you use any specific fertilizer for strawberries?
No, it's just compost and mulch.
Good.
Yeah.
And they have to be replaced or encouraged with the runners every couple of years. The plants could go and go, but they're at their highest production those first couple of years.
Okay.
Do you have any recommendations? I was wondering for strawberries that produce throughout the summer, not just in the spring, for varieties.
We haven't had good luck with that. We've bought everbearing with that intention, and they do put a few little fruits out, but I think even the everbearings mostly produce in June.
In June.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay.
We have a question that might be more for Betta and Ken again. Any thoughts on why 3/4 of my garlic dried up and turned brown during storage? To my knowledge, I cured and stored as I always have.
Dried up and turned brown.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how far along that garlic was when that happened, because that's a sort of natural process if it's, you know, after 5, 6, 7 months old. Although our garlic lately has been lasting through the 9, 12-month season. So the stems left on increase the storage ability of garlic.
Garlic's about the only thing that has done pretty well for me consistently. And this
Lucky you.
year, I just and I wasn't paying attention, but all I know is, and it has been longer, it's been in the last couple of months, nothing is good. And in the past, I have had garlic that usually lasted most of the, you know, until next harvest. But I did cut stems off this year. So I wonder if that's it.
And they do well hanging if you have a spot to put them up somewhere in a cooler place. They like that 'cause of the air circulation. And if all that fails, just put them in the refrigerator, I suppose.
Huh. Okay.
And if there was some kind of compromise in the crop during the development time, then the storage isn't going to be as good. You know, maybe they were rained on too much during the time it was supposed to be harvested, or maybe they didn't dry very well, or maybe there's a variety that doesn't do as well in this area. Saving your own seed year after year will encourage the plants to develop to the conditions of the area. So
Right. Okay.
it's just a wide open thing.
And we found that it's best to start harvesting before the plants are completely dried. If you leave them in the ground too long, especially if it rains in the middle of the summer, they can get moldy. Yeah. You don't want to water in the last month while they're
After you take the scape off the flowering part that comes on a lot of varieties of garlic, then you don't water anymore. That makes a difference how long it lasts. And also you can tell when to harvest, because 6 leaves from the bottom stem up, when those are dry or mostly dry, then the whole plant can be taken.
Okay. Excellent.
Taking vigorous notes on those because we had the same thing happen last year with ours. So
Yeah. How long in general can you store garlic for if it all goes right?
It's only supposed to be for 4 or 5 months. So if you harvest in July or August, then you're looking at January, February. But we've stretched that these last few years, and I don't exactly know why it's been better, except maybe from what Ken said, is we're really on top of harvesting that stuff. Time is right.
And there's different varieties. The soft necks store a lot longer. Those are the kind that you usually find in the grocery stores.
Okay.
And are those the best for this area?
Actually, I like the other hard necks better. They're more flavorful usually.
And they're easier to peel.
Yeah, the peeling around those soft necks makes it so that they're not as exposed to things, but the flavor's usually not.
I think that's why they store long, because they have really tight peels.
Yeah. Supposed to smash them 10 minutes before you use it to activate the allicin, that it really has its best effects on the immune system.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
all right, any more thoughts on garlic before we go to our next question?
I could talk about garlic for years.
I love garlic. Can we have a whole presentation just on garlic?
You know, we cook with garlic in everything we make. So
Yeah. I could just eat a clove of it.
Yep.
All right, this next question is more directed towards JC. So somebody says, I'm wanting to make a pollinator strip and wonder if there's a minimum or maximum size.
There's no minimum or maximum. And any pollinator plants, or which would be a plant that the pollinators visit, which also includes grasses, But if you want them to thrive, you need several types of things, not just survive. You need the pollinator plants, which a lot of people think of as a flowering plant, but also a host plant for many of our pollinators to lay their eggs. Lupin, don't be afraid when you see caterpillars. Those are ones that we want, and those are going to be your pollinators. So usually it helps if you have a grouping, or at least have 5 of the same species, because the pollinators will go from one plant to the next. And if they have to go too far, they're not going to be spreading the pollen, they'll just be getting the nectar. So if your purpose is to pollinate the plants. But a lot of our pollinators need a host plant. People think of milkweed. Milkweed is a host plant for the monarch. The nectar is important, but what's more important is that the eggs are laid on the milkweed, and when the larvae hatch, they will then chew on the milkweed, and that sustains them until they can pupate and then fly away. So it's important in some of our native species have 1 or 2 native wildflower species that they depend on in order to go into another generation.
Very cool.
So how many host plants do you need?
Well, it all depends on the species. So by a host plant, you know, there's some that are particularly good host plants. Lupins are good host plants. There's information that the Extension or the Natural Conservation NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, there's tech notes that they have on that for our local pollinators, our native pollinators. And our native pollinators have evolved with our native plants. But if you're talking about pollinators in general, it can never be too big, but it does help to have at least a grouping, more than just one of the same species, to help the pollinator. And then also, if you can encourage your neighbors to have the same species, that helps them, and they can go from plant to plant to plant. Because some of them are really specific, and and also they move pollen from one plant to the next, but it has to be the same species. And there's a whole, like Betta says, sometimes we all have things we can talk about forever, and about pollinators and how that works, and with the bees and the butterflies and the moths and the flies. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah, I think so. I mean, it sounds like you know, there's no minimum size, but you do want to make sure you've got enough room to have groupings of plants, especially host plants.
Yeah, and particularly just to help the pollinators. If you just have, they'll be able to get the nectar. But if you want your plants to thrive so that they're available for next year, and you want them to get pollinated, then it does help to have more than one.
Interesting.
It is.
I know, I'm furiously taking notes. And my hand is in a cast, so it's kind of hard. So here's the question, and then it might be more for Jody and maybe even JC. I'm late on starting flowers from seed. Is it better to let them grow a bit or get them in the soil sooner?
Well, you know, I have almost everything planted out on my farm now, but this week was looking pretty scary as far as like hail and thunderstorms. So the things that the plants that I'm direct seeding, I have covered with frost cloth just to protect them if they're really small. And I have a couple flats of newly started plants that are really small, only an inch or 2, and I'm not putting them out until after this week. But I try to get stuff out as soon as I can. I feel like everything does better out of my greenhouse. I think growing in pots in a greenhouse is challenging. If I can just get them in the ground, then they always do so much better. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, for our, I think that's good. For native plants, if you want to put those in, it's best to go with, or species, to go with plants right now. Most of our Palouse natives need to be what's called stratified. They have to go through, the seeds have to go through a cool, moist period. And it's just, when you think of Mother Nature, our seeds fall off usually in June. She doesn't want them to be germinating when it's hot and dry on the Palouse. So they have to go through 30 to 180 and some 360 days of cool, moist weather. So most of our Palouse wildflower seeds need to be planted in the fall or December or January. So late fall. There are a few, but if you could do plants, and there are people that raise the plants. But once you start getting into June, it's a little late for our Palouse natives because they start going dormant.
All right, so the next question we have is, do you have any good book or website resources for someone just getting started with gardening?
Many books.
I know. We happen to be a library.
Here, their library has plenty. I know there are a lot to get gardening books.
I'm thinking of John Jevons for growing vegetables in small spaces. Classic. And
I'm curious if you veteran growers, all of you, still refer to books. I'm always looking at books, and yet I'd like to have something just click and be almost second nature with growing. I think that might take a while.
I haven't figured out how to do that yet. I'm always looking at books and always looking online. It just seems like there's always so much to learn. But there are books if you want to landscape with native plants. You just have to be careful because they're called wild for a reason. And they don't always like to stay put. So there's certain ones that I recommend for landscaping or for in a home setting that work great and are wonderful, and but not some of them, I would say, just on your perimeter of your land. So there's a lot of good books. And
Are there any websites you would recommend? I know you brought up the NRCS website. Are there any resources you go to when you do need some backup?
There's not just one, but just to let people know, their local soil district, for us it would be the Latah Soil and Water Conservation District. They have several very knowledgeable people on our native species. So I'm talking about Palouse natives is what my focus is. So they're very knowledgeable, and they do programming. The NRCS local office, they do programming as well, especially in the winter. The Native Plant Society, the Idaho Native Plant Society White Pine chapter, it's interesting. I always learn a lot, and they have meetings and as well as tours. And then there is the Palouse Prairie Foundation, and they focus on Palouse Prairie plants, and they have a website as well. And the Washington Native Plant Society has a website with resources.
Book of Garden Secrets, and I've enjoyed that because it's what I call real, experiential stuff. And I ordered it from, it's an old library from Babbitt, Minnesota. I got a copy of it from the Babbitt Public Library. So I kind of enjoyed that, and then some local ones, but I long for the day where some things are are second nature and not, oh, am I supposed to do this? And Jody, I wondered if you, good.
This is my newest book. And this woman has a blog and a website and a business that's kind of like exploded in the last few years. And her book is actually really good. Erin Benzakein is the author, and her blog and website is Floret Farm. And then I use tons of books. I love books. There's one, I can't remember the author and I don't own it, but it's called Cool Flowers. And I've really liked that one too for growing in this region.
Oh.
Our list was my husband's question, and he didn't give me a lot of info on it, but he wanted to know if we had any tips for growing peppers in this area. He has tried unsuccessfully. He yielded like a pepper or two.
Were these like hot, spicy peppers or like bell peppers?
He's tried jalapenos and I believe green chilies and maybe something else, but he's the gardener in our family, so.
They are tricky because they like a hot weather, and it can be, our seasons are kind of not as hot as other places. So you have to have big plants to start, but you don't want to plant them out too soon unless you have some kind of greenhouse covering. Like I have a bed that's just for peppers, and it's the only bed in our whole garden where we have plastic over it.
Okay.
That we can get them started early. But still,
and plastic does it like a hoop?
Yeah, like a hoop over the bed. Yeah.
Okay.
Hoop house.
How early is early?
Well, I planted some 2 days ago, just to see how they do.
And we're actually in Pullman. Is the growing season any different? Is it the last frost date the same for the two areas?
I think it's pretty much the same.
Okay.
Maybe slightly warmer.
Yeah, my husband grows a lot of peppers, and he starts them from seed, probably a month ago, and then he just put them in the ground in the last few days too, and he's had a lot of success.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah, we can get them to produce fruit, but it seems like they start producing fruit about 3 weeks before we get a frost. So it's also helpful to have some kind of protection at the end of the season too.
Cool. Lizette in the comments says, when we did peppers growing up around here in Pullman, we started them inside in February and kept transferring them into bigger pots until they could plant them outside in May sometime. Then they planted them in a really sunny place. The garden I help at is in Julietta, so obviously it's in a canyon and it's a little warmer down there. So it's interesting to hear about how, I know people I've heard problems with growing tomatoes here as well, so you need more sun. Another how to remove, what are some of the best tactics to removing ivy?
I've only ever done it manually.
Yeah,
Me too. Pulling it off, yanking it out.
a workout.
Is English ivy a big problem around here? I used to live over in Washington on the west side, and we had a lot of ivy coming up, growing up trees. But I don't know if it's that big of a problem in this area.
It can get away, in our house, and then it starts finding cracks and enlarging the cracks in the foundation. So it's like everything, I guess, but it's not like the western side. You're right, Linda.
And do you just pull it?
I just pull it when it starts getting crazy. Yeah.
Stay ahead of it.
Okay, And I've got another question in the comments here, or in the chat here. Chris says, I joined late, but my question is, how can I boost the growth and productivity of my blueberry bushes? Do they need peat moss dug in around the root every year? Should they be pruned?
In nature, even though they grow in bogs, they grow like on little mounds in the bog, and so they're not actually, their roots are not, they're not like submerged in water. And so they say that it helps to grow them in raised beds, like up high. And in that way, I think you can control the acidity of the soil a little bit better too, because it's separated from the base ground. So you have to keep it acid enough with peat moss and pine needles, and I'm constantly putting pine needles and pine cones on top of the soil, and a lot of mulch is really important too, because ours have actually been growing and producing. They're not that big, but they're doing better than we have in the past.
Interesting.
Are there certain types of blueberries that do better here? I know when I first moved here, I was looking at one of the university's extension sheets, and I thought that there were a couple of specific types of blueberries that did better with our shorter season.
I don't know. I think they're pretty cold hardy.
Okay.
And we have 3 different kinds, one of each. So
The market partner last year put so many coffee grounds and straw and all kinds of stuff on them, and they didn't do very well last year, but she said I should come over and look at them today because they're really blossoming like crazy. So
Okay. And Chris Spalding said that she has 3 types of blueberries, and the best is Top Hat.
Top Hat.
What are, I had a friend ask me this, what are some of the easiest flowers to take care of that grow well in the area that are good for bees?
Oh, well,
Go ahead.
about native flowers, and then she would be touching on the host plants as well. But all the flowers that bloom early season and late season are good for pollinators, even if they're not a host plant, because they provide nectar at a time during the year when there aren't as many blooming flowers for any kind of pollinators, flies or bees or solitary bees or anything else like that, butterflies. So for early season flowers, for pollinators and for cut flowers, they're all going to be perennials because the annuals haven't started yet. So all the nice lilacs and early blooming lupins and delphiniums, those are some perennials that are nice in a garden and also make nice cut flowers.
Good.
Then some of the late season ones, on my farm, what are some good ones? All the asters that are blooming late, they're native asters, but I also grow a lot of cut flower varieties that are asters and keep blooming after you cut them all the way until it frosts.
I would agree with that, Jody. That's a really good point with the pollinators having early and late, because the mid-season there's plenty usually around, and your asters and goldenrods go into October, November, because the queen bees come out. They're one of our first bees, our queen bumblebees. And there aren't many things blooming when the queens emerge, and they're some of our first bees. And prairie smoke, I do have a picture when it's appropriate to show it, but it's a really important early bloomer, and it's great for landscapes, and it stays in its place, and it stays green most of the year, except in July and August, where it's more red. But Jody's point is really important for pollinators, is you need early, mid, and late bloomers.
They're awesome.
No, this is the prairie smoke, and for most of our spring flowers, and native in particular, they hang down because of the rain to protect the pollen and the nectar. And then once they get pollinated, they will start standing up. And once they stand up, then they get these Dr. Seuss hairs.
Look like jellyfish.
Yeah, they're just a beautiful and a wildflower that is one of our more tame ones for a landscape and does very well. Slow growing in slightly rhizomatous. It is very slow growing, and it's not so deep. It's not as deep rooted as our other ones, so it can be moved. Where many of our other natives, once they're there, you either, if you try to move them, you either kill them. Usually they don't survive, but these do and can be divided, but are really good for the queen bumblebees and all bees. But
do they do well in pots, is what Liza is asking.
You know, I don't know. People have asked me that, and I would think they would. The thing is, people want plants to bloom all summer when they're in pots.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not too sure how they would do. This is a native, and as Wallace Stegner said, if you're going to live in the West, you have to like brown. If you're going to, just have the land natural. That being said, by watering them, I think they would, but not water them too much. They don't like wet feet.
We've also got a question from Chris about milkweed. She said, I've never seen milkweed growing on the Palouse, but I know it's good for monarch butterflies. If milkweed is not native to our area, should I plant it? She has some seeds.
It is native.
It is.
And yes, you could plant it. I don't know if Jody grows it for flowers. I don't know how it would do once you cut it, but it's a beautiful flower and smells wonderful. You can get plants. You could probably check at maybe Plants of the Wild in Tico. We do sell seed, and actually it's found more on our road edges, in our pastures, where there's disturbance. They kind of show up. I don't know if anybody else has seen them on their property.
Yeah, I collected some right along the road, JC, this last fall, and I've grown an orange Asclepias is the genus, the milkweed, as a cut flower. It's not a native around here, but I collected some, native milkweed seed along the road last fall and tried growing it from seed this spring, and it was actually kind of challenging. It didn't like being in pots. I think most of them survived, and I'm going to try to plant them this spring, but I'm excited to see how they do. Yeah.
If you find them along a road too, or in a pasture, or of somebody who has some, they move. You just need a little bit of the plant or the root, and you can plant that, and they do extremely well that way too.
Wow.
We have some milkweed in our front yard. It's called showy milkweed. I think it's
That's our name.
in the West. And it grows quite well. In fact, I've had control it from spreading and taking over the whole front yard. From underground, it sends roots sideways and spreads. So
right.
I think it depends on where you grow it. Some places you have to be careful with it. It grows so well.
Do any of you have tips on those wanting to transition from traditional green lawns to native plants or a garden to replace their lawn?
Well, we did that. here, and I became a nuisance to anybody who was doing tree work, and having chips, wood chips,
Yeah.
just begging, and that went on for years. But eventually, we had enough of a buildup. It was probably 3 to 6 feet tall of just wood chips, and then each year we would put in something, and that's there's no more grass, and there was very little digging, and it works like that.
Mhm.
Have to be patient too. It doesn't just happen in a few months.
So we have a mixture of native plants in our front yard.
Yeah, that's where veggies.
Yeah, and some herbs and other mostly drought tolerant things, but we have artichokes growing in our front yard, and it's a
And we
mixture.
inherited roses when we came. I can't. He wants to pull them. I just can't do it. It's beautiful.
They are.
I think you should just go for it. I mean, if you want to take out some lawn, just be careful that you don't take out more than you have plans for, because if you don't plant something, then it will just turn into weeds. So think of what you want to do and make a plan before,
Yeah,
but then you for it.
and make sure you get the weeds out before you plant any perennials, because they're in town here. There's a lot of bindweed and Canada thistle, which are perennial weeds that are really hard to get rid of, and you have to dig them out like forever. But they're in the ground and mixed with all the perennial plants, then it's really hard to get them out.
Interesting.
On soil amendments that you use, what do you like to do to keep the soil healthy?
We
To
just
keep the microbes going and
yeah, we keep the soil covered at all times with some kind of a mulch, and yeah, and we do. We have had compost and manure from local areas in the past, and we dug that in. So, but now we're trying to just collect as many types of mulch as we can. Leaves in the fall, grass clippings and wood chips, whatever they, prune the street trees.
I try to keep a backup of bags of leaves on hay bales so that even in the middle of August, we're not having any grass clippings. There's well defined. At least there's this back, and the soil uses it. Microbes use that material, mimicking nature, and so it doesn't stay for a very long time. So it's that's the constant effort, is to just have a backlog of bags and bags of leaves and use them.
Yeah, I use a lot of mulch and try to keep the ground covered all the time. I use mulch for a lot of my row crops, and then I use different organic mulches for my perennial beds, and I add something. I try different things all the time. Add something in the fall, some type of compost, and then cover it for the winter, and then I'm ready to plant in the spring. And tried a few different composted manures too. This year I'm trying some alpaca manure on about half of my beds, and I'm excited to see how that's gonna go. I don't use much fertilizer, but I do use fish emulsion like for foliar feeding this time of year. So I'm spraying on a fish fertilizer in liquid form onto my early planted starts, and then I mix my own dry fertilizer for certain varieties that I use for planting and putting on perennials, and for certain heavy feeders like sunflowers. That's what I do. I feel like I'm always trying to improve it and learning from everybody, trying different things every year.
Constantly learning.
I like the reminder to keep the soil covered, because I'll work hard on what's in the ground, but I'm not paying attention to, you know, what's a foot away. So I think that is something I'm going to really try to focus on this year, is to get a little better with because I have lots of goat hay. So
Great.
and I've chopped that up and put it everywhere.
So with the peas seed library and then the seed swap event that we had a question about would you suggest on how to keep and store seeds, and what are the differences between storing vegetable seeds and flower seeds?
Cool, dark, and dry.
Yeah. And some of them I keep in the freezer for at least part of the winter. Or like JC was talking about, you put them into the freezer for a couple of weeks to stratify them before germinating them in the spring. But yeah, generally I just store stuff in my basement in a dry, cool, dark space, and I've started collecting more seed from my own cut flowers the last couple of years, and I'm excited to learn more about that.
Do you save most of your seed or no?
We don't. We save things that are easy to save, that don't cross,
Right.
like tomatoes and peppers and
Garlic.
yeah, garlic.
Beans. The squashes we can't, because we grow in the small space and they easily cross-pollinate. Trying to think of what else we grow. Whenever we can, we save seed. Lettuces, they just do better, and gotta, instead of a little 10-gram or 2-gram bag, you've got shopping.
And JC, I know you save seed.
We do. And one of the things, we're very fortunate in this area because we have low humidity.
Yeah.
So there's a rule that they call the 80% or 80. So if you have 40% humidity, then you need to have everything stored at 40 degrees. Or if we have 10% humidity, then it can be up to 70 degrees. But we find that really we don't, like they said, in a dark container, if it's needs to dry out a little bit, paper bags are wonderful to use because allows moisture to go out, and dry and dark. And we're so fortunate in this area because we don't have the hot humidity and to deal with. And but like your milkweeds can get moldy, so because it's cooler and there's still a lot of humidity, so that by the time you're collecting those, so those you need to be thinking about it, but keeping it where the airflow is around it, just like they were talking about with the garlic. Good airflow, not just all shoved on top of each other.
All right, so we're gonna start wrapping up unless anyone has any last minute comments to throw out there. But I do want to thank everyone so much for being here.
Thank you all so much for participating. I could ask questions all day. So.
I know. We need to have like a full day of this, a retreat.
Very delightful.
Thank you.
All right, bye everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.